Welcome back to the Clearly Podcast, where we cut through the hype and ask, what does it actually take to change the way the world moves? I'm Danielle, your host, and my guest today has done the impossible again and again. He has built national policy from scratch. He led London mobility experiments through change and the way we've all moved today. He's been inside startups at the bleeding edge of EV design and production, and inside government rooms negotiating billion-pound budgets and global emission deals. Michael Hurwitz is a partner of PA Consulting, fellow at Local Globe, and he is one of the few people who is alive today that really knows how to change transport at scale. And he's here to tell us all about it, past the headlines. Welcome, Michael.
Thanks, Danielle. Good to be here.
Really good to have you. Michael, as I said to you many times again, it's like you've had 10 different lives in terms of all of your background. I mean, you've been in policy, you've been in the public sector, startups, VCs. I'm going to get straight to it in terms of what is your hardest moment and what is the point that nearly broke you?
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, it's kind of diverse and it's unusual. The big stuff tends to be fun. So like the big policy decisions, starting the UK's electric vehicle programme or the driverless car programme is fun. And like bringing, micromobility to London is complicated and you need patience, you've got to take people with you. That's fun, so it's hard. I think the things that I found really difficult is some of the kind of political / public exposure. So in central government, for example, there's a process called select committees, which is a really good thing for democracy. You might have seen it on TV. There's like a horseshoe of MPs who grill a government minister about what they're doing or what they haven't done. And it's really good that it happens, but they are trying to catch you out, and it's live on TV. And if it doesn't come out in the right way, it could go politically bad, or it could be on the headlines of the news. And I used to find that stressful, like Dieselgate with the VW emissions scandal. I was alongside the minister as the official for that select committee, and you get reams of briefing papers to get ready, trying to think about every possible difficult question they could ask you. So days and nights of prep and rehearsal, and you think, oh my gosh, am I going to navigate this okay, or am I going to be the one on the headlines? And that night we knew that it was going to be the number one story on the 10 o'clock news, and I don't feel sorry for Volkswagen for what they did, cheating the system, but I did feel sorry for the person they put up on that committee hearing, because either they weren't allowed to answer or they just didn't know the answers. And essentially the montage at the beginning of the 10 o'clock news was this poor guy from VW saying, I'll have to get back to you on that, and luckily said nothing I said was reported. But it's that kind of jeopardy, and it's particularly when you might be giving an account for what someone else has done. Mm-hmm. So I found that fairly stressful and a bit of a burden.
So this is when you're at Transport for London. You were, context here, Director of Energy, Transport and International.
The Department for Transport nationally.
Nationally, right. And you built and set up a cross-Whitehall team, which is just mind-blowing that you could operate across teams, so Office for Low Emissions and the Centre of Connected Vehicles and Autonomous Vehicles. Some sexy stuff going on here, so much that you covered.
Yeah, so I joined government from the private sector, and I guess as the ex-private sector person, I already started to have the ability to talk like bilingually, to the policymakers, but also to business and the private sector.
Very rare, really important.
Yeah, it's unusual but useful. And that first example about zero emission vehicles, the current government structures were just very inefficient. And when you get something agreed in the UK government, there's a cabinet system, and all around the cabinet table has to agree. So it's great because it drives consensus, but my goodness, it is inefficient. And that actually grew out of me losing my temper once at a meeting. It was in and around when Nissan were deciding where to build a Nissan Leaf in Europe. And it came down to competition between the UK and Portugal. And we needed speed and agility. And it's great to be the centre of political attention, but it would frustrate me having to write the same advice, make the same recommendations, then tour around Whitehall. And and I had enough of one meeting. I said, right, I had enough of this. We're just going to bring everyone in the same room, write it once, get all the ministers together once. And then we created this new government structure where we took everyone out of the relevant departments and said, right, we're going to do it. And I actually remember when talking to Nissan, and I was able to say to them, said, right, you just talk to us now. They're like, what? I don't have to talk to all of those? No, just talk to us. So you give them a single point of contact. So it was something that we did in government to make it easier for people doing fast-moving, exciting development stuff, easier for them to be able to interact with and get what they wanted. Well, I was going to say get what they wanted out of government. They don't always get what they want, but at least to have that efficient point of contact. So I did that twice. Once on driverless cars. After that,
which we'll get back to.
We'll get back to. Yeah.
I guess the big thing in government, on the private and public side, that the engagement between two is quite difficult because both parties believe that each other are against. The government want to prevent with regulation, for example, and slow us down. Private side are probably trying to screw us over. We need to put more regulation to safeguards in place. So I guess it's having that deep fundamental understanding of both sides that allows you to say, hang on guys, actually, this is the core of what we're trying to actually get over the line here. This is the objective of both sides. This is why it's going to be of the interest of both sides. And actually having this win-win, a competitive edge in terms of the UK of pushing through new forms of technology that may have gone to other countries, as we're saying here. And also then for obviously allowing the private side to get this facilitation, either policy or of course, initiation of funding to also move faster. Yeah,
and that is, you're always going to compromise. There's a bit of it's very, very rare when you get a policy or an intervention that everybody likes. Like building up, there's kind of a joke, if you're writing government policy, I'm stopping myself because I'm about to swear. If you piss everyone off equally, you're probably doing okay. Am I allowed to swear on this? But it's actually, you have to play different roles at different times. So when I was, I guess, in that role again at TfL, Transport for London, you find yourself at the one point talking to your policy team saying, yeah, but if you put that amount of burden on, it ceases to become a viable investment for a business or for a CFO. But then you have to spend equally as much time talking to the management structures in the organisation to say, look, we have different objectives here and you need to cut a deal. The primary responsibility for government is to support the public they represent, and things like inclusion, equality, accessibility are very, very rarely commercial drivers in most organisations. And you've just got to find a central path, and that's what I've always tried to do is find the way of allowing people to progress positively, move forwards, try and make the world a better place, but you've both got to give a little.
You've already mentioned TfL, their Director of Transport Innovation, big role. I want to go straight to it. Obviously COVID hit, Transport for London faced existential risk. I mean, what was the first move that you made in that situation?
Well, yeah, you're right. So Transport for London, one of the biggest transport authorities in the world, integrated, multiple services, regulation, manages all the strategic road network in London. And yeah, it survives financially off fares. And right at the beginning, London Underground, the tube, had gone down 95%. Buses had initially gone down 90%. Actually, it bounced back a little bit because more people on essential services use the bus. More people who use the tube were probably more able to work remotely. But yeah, it was critical. When I was at Transport for London, I was part of their crisis management structures. So every 9 weeks I was on duty for something called like the Duty Gold Commander for major incidents. So if there's a bad weather, major closure, big event, terrorist incident, something unforeseen, you kick into operational emergency management. And by the way, there are extraordinary people in the control room at TfL, on a front line at TfL, who just know everything about how the city moves. As Gold Command, you have to take like some of the trickier decisions or set the strategy overall. So I had this training. Every 9 weeks I was on call for this stuff. And then I was kind of voluntold is that I had the training, but I didn't have a big operational business like the buses or the overground. And right at the beginning of when COVID was coming and then started, I was the overall strategic coordination director for surface transport. So I didn't do the tube, but I did surface transport. And the very first thing we did is that there was a resilience planning team that would maintain these emergency plans. They were planning for when the Queen was going to pass away, in Operation London Bridge. They would have bad weather plans, all of that kind of stuff, maintaining procedures, guidance. And the first thing we needed to do when it became apparent that this wasn't just going to be a one-off incident, this is going to be with us for 18 months or more.
Which we didn't know at the time.
We didn't know, but we had to turn it into a team. So it's like, right, what are we going to need to make you do what you do, but the whole time and bigger. And then one of the very next things to do, and I always remember this, is there were some extremely knowledgeable, capable people, far more than me, the senior managers operating London Transport. I remember being the one to say, look, we're meeting in person. I think this should probably be the last time we meet in person. And I also remember saying, and we should probably all assume we're going to get it, so make sure you've nominated a deputy. So I remember that was probably the very first thing we did. And then operational plans started running. And the next thing that happened to me, which was unforeseen, is that we got a phone call from actually the NHS and the Army to say that they were going to turn the Excel exhibition centre into the Nightingale Hospital. So then I moved into organising the transport for the Nightingale Hospital, which fortunately never filled up. But nevertheless, sorting out the planning, closing certain stations where you would be able to see the A&E entrance, which wouldn't be good, putting up all the nurses in local hotels, doing bus shuttle services. I remember one meeting getting the schematics of a double-decker bus and working out how many healthcare staff you could get on a double-decker bus whilst being socially distanced. Answer was 12, by the way. But really, really deep operational stuff. And actually, back to your first question, that was probably the most stressful time. Extremely rewarding, but lost a sense of what day of the week it was, what time of day it was, because it was constantly in emergency response.
Something that we just now, feels like a distant memory, and yet we all thought that the way we move would be radically different post this. Of course, the way we operate now in businesses in terms of hybrid has definitely made a massive impact, but we're still, the more transport you give, the more demand there is, it seems. Back to moving. So obviously, the funding came previously, or still today, from ticket sales. I imagine that the government had to then step in during COVID. So it literally just then just became a public duty that you were going from a very different role of business as usual with this 9-week stint that you would come in and out to crisis as usual. And then forgetting about the kind of meeting your numbers part and just obviously meeting the running and the public duty part.
Yeah, completely. It was about maintaining a service and keeping everyone safe.
Yeah.
That was the whole job. And yes, and there was obviously huge and difficult discussions with government about how much was needed to keep everyone going. TfL actually, the last couple of years, has got back to its operational surplus,
right?
Which has been tough, but it's taken that long to recover the financial stability.
Wow, okay. Listen, you've led London's innovation across so many different modes of transportation. You said that you started before even covering the tube, but even above the tube, right? You've got so many different modes from cycling, micromobility, the testing of autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, hybrid. What is something where we, the public, haven't seen, but you'll never forget?
Yeah, well, you're right. TfL, it was Micromobility was an interesting one. There's some good stories about micromobility. I don't know if you remember, winding back to the late teens, the law in the UK is totally out of date when it comes to what you can put on the streets. There's an arcane rule, I think from 1835, that prevents motorised vehicles like on pavements and not unless they're on the road. And there was nothing to constrain bikes, and then some people were coming to doing e-scooters as well, potentially illegally. But there's no law to stop you, and so I do remember having a conversation with a founder who was saying, we're bringing thousands of bikes. We want to make it easier for you to get a bike than coming out of your house and getting into a car or a bus. And we're like, I'm not sure I entirely want that. Anyway, they came and they dumped thousands of bikes on the street. And with pretty poor technology, so much so that there was no GPS in the bike. The phone where you would log off your ride, that would be recorded as where the bike was, right? So people could literally pick up the bike and throw it away or take it somewhere else. And it was genuinely becoming a public hazard. But the only real powers there were at that time is that if we were genuinely sure that there was going to be a risk to public health and safety, could we do anything about it? Anyway, so unbeknownst to quite a lot of people, we gave them a chance. We tried to get them to sort it out and they didn't. So we confiscated a load of bikes on the roads that TfL control. So there is a control centre in London, which there are 6,300 traffic light junctions in London, of which 4,000 are controlled from the control room. Wow. It's like everything you imagine in a control room. Big screens, the emergency services, people speaking to the buses, looking at the tunnels, controlling all the CCTV as necessary, and massive operational responsibility of keeping flow moving, but actually controlling the roads. It's only the red routes, the strategic roads. So we basically found out where they were on our roads and confiscated them all. And amazingly, because we brought them back in and said, have you got any bikes missing? Because they didn't really know where they were. I said, yeah, we've got them. And
from a business point of view, I mean, obviously that's terrible, but from a movement point of view, the fact that you could move anywhere, leave the bikes anywhere, this is the time when you didn't need to dock and you didn't have GPS verification where you're docking. It was just... Yeah,
and it was after that we, and that, again, that was one of those things where it was a huge amount of effort and massive credit to London councils, all the various boroughs. There are 34 highways authorities in London, the City of London, Transport for London, and 32 London boroughs. Wow. And so we kind of got everybody to agree a code of practice is if you're going to come here, this is how you have to do it. And that was agreed across government, and the way TfL now operates like e-scooters, it's a collaborative scheme with a number of the boroughs, not all of them, but as many as were prepared to play ball.
And I imagine that the teams that you set up before, which is again cross teams and cross departments, the fact that you set that up, you can actually put those policies in place much quicker and much more efficiently than you would have done before. Yeah.
Well, you learn how to take a lot of people with you who are going to be very resistant. But yeah.
Wow, fantastic. Gosh. Pause on government a second. Let's then fast forward to your days in a startup Arrival. Pretty sexy company at the time. I mean, they raised over $1 billion, SPAC for 13 to 15 billion from memory, spent about $1.5 billion on R&D, designing and producing the future of electric vehicles. You obviously then went from private to public, back into startup. So you're the fresh new guy with all these ideas in government, like the crazy dude. And then I guess you were kind of like the bit of the boring dude when you went into this startup.
Yeah, oh my God. Well, so look, you're absolutely right. I said at the beginning, I was like the ex-private sector guy. It was like, come on, we have to find a way of getting stuff done. And that had taken me to be the most senior government official in national government and trying to start some new stuff. Fundamentally trying to get the politicians and the government like less scared of the new stuff, embracing it, shaping it to meet what the country needs. Similar at TfL, taking the difficult things that didn't fit in the existing categories and trying to make them work. And then I've never felt like as much of a transformation as I kind of became the like the old grump. He said, hold on, a bit more process, please. And my story there is quite interesting. So I'd come in from Transport for London as the mobility guy. So Arrival, you're right, it was the highest value tech IPO at the time in the UK. And it was a brilliant concept, amazing people, going to make electric commercial vehicles, so delivery vans and buses. Phenomenal innovation around materials, so they're going to make the panelling of the bodies out of composite thermoplastic rather than metal, which completely took out huge costs from the production process. The body shop and the paint shop just weren't needed in the way they were in traditional automotive manufacturing. And I came in as the mobility guy to say, well, look, can we do more than just make these things? Can we actually run services out of these things to generate revenue? Mm-hmm. And one of the projects I was looking at, one of the main projects, was could we actually maybe run some bus services and run bus services in London? And, we pre-qualified, we'd identified where, the kind of buses would work well on the network. We'd identified a couple of bus lines we might be interested in, and we were edging towards putting a deposit down for a depot. And I was like, I gotta know whether the vehicles are going to be ready. Now, the beauty of a startup is I just started, going to the vehicle planning meetings and working out what was going on. And it became apparent that, all was not well. And it was struggling with start production, struggling with bill of materials. And, I'd spent all this time with the automotive industry in previous roles. And I was kind of leaned in and was took over the vehicle cycle plan. And it wasn't just me, because people were also looking at the manufacturing process. But that was a little bit like opening Pandora's box. And we weren't going to be able to meet what we'd said publicly at that point. Did a SPAC when it was all the rage, when money was relatively easy to raise. And there was a bit of bad luck. All startups, I think, trying to particularly make EVs, and even more so commercial EVs, there's a long list of companies that have tried and not made it. So there's Arrival, there's Volta, Lordstown Motors, even into buses, Proterra, Nikola. And they all have this really hard moment that you could probably call it the capital crunch, right? So you work with fleets. I currently do a lot of work now with fleets, good fleet managers, managing their asset strategy. You know how it works. The procurement behaviour is to try a new vehicle or a new technology. They'll try a couple, get comfortable with it, then make it a bit bigger, maybe 50, maybe low hundreds. And then once they've run that and they are confident that it works for servicing, maintenance and repair, it can be integrated into operations, then they'll make the big order. And that takes a long time, and it could be 18 months, 3 years, maybe. Back to the startup, that's extremely hard, because you get to a point at the beginning of that process, maybe 3 years, where you have to lock down design. You have to invest in your soft tooling, probably hard tooling, to make the stuff. You have to buy all the working capital, all the bits and pieces, and you have to get your aftercare, your servicing, warranty, all aligned, and the revenue doesn't start coming in until that big 3-year order has elapsed. And so you get to a point where you're just going to have to burn capital. And it's going to be a minimum of tens, possibly hundreds of millions of dollars for about 3 years before you get the revenue. And a lot of the firms have struggled. They could have been let down by one thing. Some of them have been supply chain. I think with Arrival, there wasn't. There was a lot of innovation in the product. They were doing a lot of things themselves, quite vertically integrated, which gave a lot more control, but took on board a lot more risk in production. So, yeah, but it was brutal, man. Right? Honestly, it was an amazing experience. The people there were absolutely brilliant and passionate. And I remember having one conversation with somebody who'd moved over from Korea, actually, and we were discussing, of all things, airbags, and talking about how long it was going to take to get a new airbag developed and approved to meet this beautiful inside of the van. And he worked out how long it was going to be, which was too long. And the poor guy, you see his face draining. He'd found the thing. He found the thing that he thought was going to change the way we move, change the way we manufacture. He'd moved country, moved his family over, and then all of a sudden it falls away. So there's some really brutal moments. But I was learning there like every day, every half day.
Which is the life of a startup, right? It's brutal, and it's definitely not for everyone. It's what you fall in love with day one is that you've just got to completely drop it and move on day two, and that's really hard for everyone, right? You just got to kind of thicken up on that and say, okay, I'm going to be driven now to keep on focusing around this iterative approach. I guess on your point of, you kind of skip that iteration around, hi customer, would you like to try my half-baked product? Well, I can't really try a half-baked product because of safety and everything else around the production and how much it's going to cost me. We've also seen the OEMs where you're effectively creating a shadow company because the whole supply chain is completely different. And I guess the argument is it the OEMs that can do it and actually have that customer base and that knowledge? But it's, again, what is it knowledge? Because it's so fundamentally different. Or, as we thought with an Arrival and many others, is it this new startup is going to get enough funding, they will be able to have that focus, that engagement, and maybe even that partnership and collaboration, right? That paid partnership and collaboration with a number of OEMs that you could have done this iterative cycle and maybe actually accepted the 3 years, right? Planned, funded, and accepted that 3-year cycle.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. There would be many other ways of doing it. It's very rare that, well, certainly for Western companies, it's very rare for startups to keep going and make it. Asia's totally different. China's totally different. They've found ways that they don't have incumbency. They haven't got huge sunk capital cost into plant in the way that the traditional OEMs have over here. So whilst the OEMs can give you certainty, what it's missing is the agility. So yeah, but and with some of the certainty, probably, if you're old school OEM, then that will slow down your decision making.
Let's shift here a bit to the tech. So obviously you've seen a lot. You're still seeing a lot today. What's some of the tech that you saw early that you think will still make a very big impact today? Oh,
do you know, actually something's happened this week. It's back into energy. And part of the original vision, like why were we doing electric vehicles in the first instance in government? Why did we write the National Carbon Reduction Plan for Transport, and why do we set up that programme? Yes, it was about reducing emissions, and yes, it was really a big thing about jobs and investment and getting future skills and capabilities to the country. But the other bit was around the overall decarbonisation of and the resilience of the energy system. And as you move more energy independent onto more renewables, more wind, the issue you have with the grid is intermittency. So, this ideas of grid balancing, vehicle to grid, or, essentially charging when it's windy, not charging when it isn't so windy or not so sunny, in the future, even giving energy back to the grid is essential. And, and the concept was, could transport and vehicles start to be part of the solution, not just part of the problem? And if you look at it right now, there are 1.6 million electric vehicles on the roads in the UK. If you were to add up how much electricity that would use, with average mileage, this is all published average, that will probably consume, it will be more than 4 terawatt hours of electricity a year. Between 4 and 5, depending on what figures you use. And that is money. That is serious money. That is what in wholesale electricity prices, which I checked before I came, it's over £300 million annually of wholesale electricity. And there is this really interesting idea in the way that the energy system is evolving in the UK for flexibility and demand side response, is that there is money to be made on helping the grid balance itself. And we are now genuinely at a cusp of where vehicles and other home appliances are going to be able to contribute to balancing the grid and actually make customers or fleets money. There was something that sounds very innocuous. Last week, it was code P483. So NESO is the National Energy Systems Operator. It's what National Grid has become. They've put through a new code which allows private consumers to play into the flexibility markets. So in the future, in the not too distant future, if you have an EV or a heat pump or a big battery, you are going to be able to definitely save money and eventually make money from how and when you choose to start. And yes, there's a customer aspect to that, individual customer, but we both work with fleets. I think there's a massive opportunity here if you have predictable usage cycles, back to base, depot charging, combining that with energy storage, sophisticated charging planning, looking at the weather coming ahead, looking at the duty cycles, your route planning coming ahead. I think there's going to be huge opportunity, practical opportunity for private customers and big fleets to reduce their capital outlay, reduce operating costs, and potentially actually generate money from being smart. And so this was a concept, I get really excited about it because it sounded mad almost. Back into 2008, I think it was the first time I remember having a conversation about this concept. There's a lot to happen.
Sure.
But it is.
Great.
And and I think that's a really exciting thing that people should really be getting involved in.
Brilliant. And the less exciting thing that we were all promised is around data monetization. And we have been talking around generating money from this vehicle to grid to vehicle, vehicle to everything, effectively cycle. Who would you position, not who company, but in terms of sector, corporate startup, or even a role to play with government? Who do you believe would be leading in this space?
Well, it's going to be a framework set by government and the regulator.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then I would argue it's who wins the battle for the customer.
Mm.
I have this conversation, a different part of the value chain, with the banks or the big leasing companies that put vehicles on the road. You see a brilliant company like Octopus, who are just great at this stuff, fantastic at customer, fantastic at product innovation. If you're an organisation that previously leased petrol cars or petrol or diesel vans, and now they're going to be electric, do you want the happy paths for the customer to be owned by the energy companies? Mm-hmm. I don't know. So I'd say there's going to be a bit of a battle about the companies that are the ones that find a way of engaging the customer. The customer comes to them for the operational savings or the financial savings, are the ones that are going to win.
I guess it's also the player that has the biggest data set across these different fields, obviously movement, energy, asset, that has the knowledge layer that can combine over to actually give that predictability and can offer that service to the customer. You mentioned the banks. What is a very large leasing company now that has a lot of assets under management, right? If you look at, we had Arval here before, and 3.4 million vehicles. They're now registered as a bank. They've got tons of data that's actually running here, and actually as an asset manager, would they front this, for example? So interesting to see post-governmental leadership where this will sit.
Yeah, so I've always been of a believer. I've been lucky enough to be involved in some big sort of market creating decisions nationally or in London, but I do believe that you're going to need creative companies to make it work,
sure,
make it sustainable on the ground. You are absolutely right about the importance of data. I don't think anyone's quite solved how you monetize it yet.
No.
And it is potentially a gold mine. So if you're able to, I guess, in terms of sharing information for government, if you know when people are charging, how they're charging, where they're charging, how much they're charging, that's both useful from a policy point of view, but back into the private sector, we do a lot of work now with the EV charging companies, the charge point operators. I know you've had some of those on this pod as well. So much is dictated by, have you got the right spots? Can you predict where you're going to have maximum utilisation? Do you truly understand in an increasingly competitive market what data your customer needs? What does it mean to be easy for charging? So I think that the data that Arval, others, I think the biggest leaser and combined financer in the UK is Lloyds Banking Group. They have 1.1 million vehicles on the road. The biggest direct one in the UK is Motability Operations. They have 850,000. And that is a gold mine of data. And I think the more forward-thinking ones now are working out what they can do with that data. I mean, what I would say as a goal for that industry is the fundamental economics of leasing businesses are purchase price versus residual value.
100%.
And if you're able to select carefully the right data that allows you to engage the customers to leave battery vehicles in the best condition, with the least battery degradation, it's a theory and it's a hypothesis at this moment, yet to be proven. But if you can predictably understand what RV is going to be for given vehicles, then as a minimum it helps the financial planning of the organisation. As a maximum, if the vehicles on your scheme are the best looked after, or you engage with customers like that, it's going to reward that organisation as well. So there's a lot of interesting things to go after on data.
Yeah, it's interesting because I thought before it would be that the industry has to get used to buying data, right? No, I can survive without. I'm good enough with an average. And actually getting used to that idea that they can do a lot more business in a better way by buying that data. But maybe it's on the other side, right? The seller of the data insights actually needs to just get better at selling it as a product. Not just selling data, they are obsessed with a certain problem statement across the supply chain. And that's what they obsess around, right? So, this knowledge layer that they can offer out to say, we can demonstrate X value to you through X data. And then the data becomes the facilitator, as opposed to the actual, the product itself.
Yeah, and you said it quickly, but you said one absolutely essential point is for a use case. You've got to have the problem statement that everyone goes, oh yes, we should solve for that.
Yes. And
all data can all be useful, but it isn't all useful.
Yeah, don't rely on the customer. Tell us your problem statement. You probably won't get it from them.
Yeah.
So listen, you have done £1 billion programs within government. You've sat inside a startup that also raised billions. What would you say is easier?
Raising from government or raising from funders?
Exactly.
Do you know there's a lot of similarities, right? Because you have to tell the same story again and again, right? So you go around, like we set up the EV program. We took it through 3 different government administrations. And then ministers change, so you have to explain to them from the first principles.
And have the same smile and the same enthusiasm as you're just saying it for the first time.
Yeah, and that's the skill is actually distilling what's, how do you take them on a journey quicker than you did before.
Sure.
So that's similar. There's like windows of time. That's there's like market sentiment for funding. There's like certain investment theses are popular. In government you have the budget, and there are windows, so it's very focused on certain times. But there's two big differences. The first is that in government, yes, you have to convince lots of people, the different departments, but there is one funder. It's the Treasury.
Sure.
Right. So so you have to play the long game, and you have to keep going, and you probably have to play to their tune quite closely. And the other one is, and I see this in Local Globe, I'm always so impressed. I'm not involved in their investment decisions, but in their deal flow, they look at the founder and the leadership team. And there's an element of, okay, we believe enough about your Tao and your Sam and your Son, but do we believe in you that you're going to come across unexpected scenarios, and we have to believe that you are resilient enough and you can pivot when you need to, and there's an element of how you sell it in government, and do they trust you, and you have to build that rapport. But it's got to be the programme. The people change, officials change, and I'd say that's probably the biggest difference. There's a business case. The government one is an economic case and a social case. The startup one is very commercial, financial about return. Well, depends if you're raising from the UK or Europe or the US. They ask for different things.
Of course, definitely so. Different belief system.
But yeah, there we go. So both hard, different.
Both hard, different. Bigger audience on the private side. One audience on the public side, but can be different people, different times, different attitude, different mindset, and different information that you provide them. Speaking of pitches, what do most founders get wrong when they're pitching into transport?
Oh, transport's a big thing, right? Okay, so let's start. Transport operators, it's just appreciating that you are trying to introduce something new to a really slim margin, massively optimized operation. And when I was at Transport for London, part of my job was sort of facing out to the VC world, like e-scooters, data companies, mapping companies. There was a time I brought a whole bunch of the e-scooter VCs into the control room in Transport for London, and you see everything going on there. And it was trying to make the point is that, I know you've got a nice idea, but there's a lot.
This is reality.
There's a lot. It might help a bit. It might help a bit. Some people are going to like it. Some people are not going to like it. So just set your expectations realistically. Look at all the things you have to take into account. Public access. Like the first duty of a transport authority is to protect and assert the rights of the public, right? So you've got to work for everybody. You've got to keep the network flowing. You've got to keep people safe. So I would say to operators, it's that understanding about how you go into an existing operation. Doing surgery on someone whilst they're heart surgery while someone's running a marathon. That kind of analogy. I think to business, particularly for big businesses, you need a route to scale. You might have a really, really clever idea, but if you are one of these, an Arval or a Lloyd's, or you have to do something that can match that level of ambition. The mistake they make to government is what used to call it like the "couldn't you just" school of lobbying. It's complex, and sometimes it can be imperfect, and it might not be for the right reasons, but sometimes politics makes things very hard and
but very grounded.
Yeah, can
take back there is first do your homework in a much greater depth. So really see again going back to this problem statement and use case. Much more research needed, and then the second point is have an action plan around. Okay, if this goes well, how are we going to get from a pilot of 10 into a production of 10 million and more?
Yeah.
You've built policy. Let's go. That's the founder mistake. Let's go to maybe one of your mistakes, or maybe you've got no mistakes, right? But you've built policy, and there's been some really hardcore policy to put in place. It's really changed things for everyone watching. Is there anything that you would have not done back then with the knowledge that you have now?
It's a good question. I mean, every single policy had to have some kind of compromise.
You said.
And there was one thing that used to bother me, but it doesn't bother me so much now because it's kind of resolved itself a little bit. When we started the first funding to support electric vehicle charging infrastructure, and actually genuinely that was, and I remember that meeting, like we literally had a map of the country. It's like, right, how do we start, how should this network start to form? And it was a competitive process, and we wanted to encourage people to invest here, to build businesses here. And there's one thing I'd seen which was really cool in Holland, in the Netherlands, where they'd insisted up front from interoperability between charging providers. But there was quite a nascent and vibrant startup set of businesses in the UK that were really, really cautious about it. And I didn't push through interoperability at the beginning because I was worried that, I think collectively we and the ministers wanted to get it going. And so I would have liked to have done more interoperability up front because I think it paid back later, but it's now being sorted. Like my successors in Office for Zero Emission Vehicles and DFT and the Energy Department have done some really cool things on standardisation and, all new infrastructure for a long time now. You've got to turn up and do like pay as you go, and it's incredible. I think I was looking at the data a couple of weeks ago. something like 85,000 public charge points now in the UK. Industry is planning to plough in another 6 billion itself. Government's just about to fund the local electric vehicle infrastructure fund, which is going to plough hundreds of millions into residential charging. So I think it feels very different to how it did a few years ago, and then wind forward 2 years, 3 years, it's going to feel really different again.
Amazing, really, really exciting. So listen, you've shaped how millions of people move in a new way. I guess the natural question is, what's next?
Well, do you know, kicked it off in about 2015. I think driverless cars is reaching a really, really interesting time. Mm-hmm. It's got really interesting commercially and technologically. So commercially, two biggest in the world in terms of fully driverless paid for rides. Baidu, over 14 million rides now. Waymo, over 10 million. Actually, Waymo, I spotted in their operating area in San Francisco. Uber is the most popular ride-hailing app. They've just overtaken Lyft to be the second most popular ride-hailing app, which I think is an extraordinary thing. And it's now at a point where they are confident enough in their processes and their business model that they're going to expand. And it's not going to be everywhere. I don't know, next 5 years, maybe 30 global city deployments. But if you're in one of those cities, you're going to start experiencing it. And I think that's going to be a really, really interesting, commercial development. But I also think, like, technologically, it's really interesting. There's some huge questions about, how safe is safe enough? How much kit is enough to convince regulators, convince local cities about how they need to operate and integrate with, with local transport. I mean, I think Waymo now say they've passed 100 million fully autonomous miles, and it sounds loads, right? Surely if they've done that safely, then surely that must be enough. But put it into context.
Sure.
In the US, there's one fatality for every 100 million miles driven. In the UK, it's twice as safe as that. It's one fatality for every 200 million miles driven. And there's a academic just retired from Carnegie Mellon called Phil Koopman. He says that's table stakes. If that's just starting to prove you're safe. And
do we know the fatal numbers for the 100 million that they've done in Waymo?
Believe there's no fatalities.
Okay.
But there's various incidents. There's bad incidents.
Right.
And they also produce a lot of safety data about how they believe that accidents that cause damage are less frequent.
Yes.
There's a whole series of incidents that machines can avoid, see 360, observe people coming from different directions that humans can't. But there's also some behaviours that machines do, AI does, that humans would probably avoid. And so it's a really interesting point now about how safe is safe enough. There's a technological debate within the industry around what system of AI you're going to use. Are you going to have this planned system like Waymo uses, looking at lots of scenarios, preparing for lots of eventualities? That's an oversimplification, but broadly they're in that camp. Over to like Wave in the UK, great company in the UK, but they're end to end. It's more like a brain works. It just observes, works what to do, but
then it's learning as it goes on.
Yeah, and it's harder to explain retrospectively how did it come to that decision. So, but it's going to start happening.
Yes.
And I think there's a heavenly version of it and a hellish version of it. Heavenly, it makes things safer. It integrates with public transport. It allows people to have access to mobility that are otherwise less active. Hellish version of it is you got a whole load of empty driverless vehicles creating congestion, cruising for the next passenger, and destroys public transport networks. So it's going to have to be shaped, but it's a really interesting time because we've now moved from concepts not into full deployment, but into the first scale deployments, which is going to be super fun.
I mean, on the one side, they definitely move more cautiously, but then there's the trade-off that if you've got a mix at the moment between the human and the machine moving together, of course the gap is going to be wider. They're going to be more cautious, of course, of drivers. But if you just had full autonomy on the roads, of course, then you can have vehicle to vehicle with a closer proximity, just making sure, obviously, then we have the engagement with the human, which is the pedestrians. So you know, there's obviously an evolution there.
But we're a long way from that.
We're a long way from that. Exactly.
There's going to be mixed systems for a long time. You know, like
there will be.
At the moment, you can see why the business case will make sense for like a ride hail or a service provider.
Sure.
You know, because if you have greater efficiency, you will be removing some of the driver labour costs. You'll be adding other costs in, you know, for controllers and other systems and assets. They are expensive assets.
Yep.
You can see how it would make sense for service providers, but in most cities around the world, taxi, ride hail is 1 to 5% of trips. For the scenario that may come to pass in the future, you know, you'd have to be replacing all vehicles, you know, personal vehicles likely to become more autonomous, but I struggle to see how the total cost of ownership will work for an individual if you have to pay that much more. But we shall see.
Hopefully we can move back into that shared mode of transportation and put more people into shared and autonomous as another way forward.
Yeah.
We asked this question to everyone to finish off. Thank you for all the insights today. Learned a bunch. If you had a billboard on every depot, boardroom and city hall, what is it going to say?
Well, look, and this is to instruct them about what they should do in the world. Is that the idea?
Whatever you want.
Whatever I want. Okay.
Make it short, make it snappy.
So, I think I came to a point where I like taking this new technology and working out how you can make it work. Right? As I said before, it's I find myself as this sort of translator. But I think you have to lean in. You can't let it happen. And I also think, and I took this personal view, is that I want to make sure my working life leaves the place better for the next generation. So what I would say is probably, it's like an exhortation. It's like, lean in and let's make sure we're leaving the place better than we found it.
Nice. Great for the kids.
Yeah.
Michael, I learnt loads from what's next in terms of autonomous vehicles. I guess the worry of what is safe enough in the bringing in of AV. Everything to do with the complexity. So for a start, if you are pitching to transport, probably do your homework of those 6,400 traffic control points, all the way through to how you can actually scale out to go from the 10 to 10 million. The really exciting thing that you're seeing at the moment, obviously, is this energy network, so vehicle to grid, grid to vehicle, and how we as passengers or very large fleet can finally save cost or make money. Definitely going to keep an eye on that, and really going to keep an eye on who is actually going to be at the helm of driving that innovation. That's going to be really exciting. Fears and what you've done in the past to what you're actually excited in the future. You've shared so much. I can't wait to continue monitoring what you're doing at the moment with your current role, what you do next. And thank you so much for sharing it all today.
Thank you very much.